A Canadian Armed Forces veteran laid into MPs at a Veterans Affairs Committee, demanding action from the government to prevent suicide among veterans.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford is disputing Prime Minister Mark Carney's claims that he wouldn't have released an anti-tariff ad that led to a breakdown in trade talks with the U.S.
Liberal Industry Minister Melanie Joly avoided answering questions about the government's controversial multi-billion-dollar deal with the automaker Stellantis. Hello Canada, it's Tuesday, November 4th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Canadian Armed Forces veterans are demanding access to psychedelic medicines to treat mental health issues related to their service to the country, and a majority of Canadians are behind them. Kelsey Sharon, a veteran, podcaster, and advocate for veterans' mental health, criticized the Liberal government for inaction and harmful policies during a House of Commons committee meeting last Tuesday on reducing suicide among Canadian Armed Forces veterans. In her opening testimony, Sharon lambasted the government and MPs for failing to track suicide numbers among veterans and armed forces members and for offering euthanasia through its medical assistance in dying program instead. She also noted the government has failed to deliver promised funding for psychedelic research and for the barriers preventing veterans from accessing potentially life-affirming treatments such as psychedelic therapy, including psilocybin mushroom therapy.
You don't fix a broken system by euthanizing it, people. And while you fund death and continue to expand in 2027, you deny life-saving treatments. I don't know, psychedelic-assisted therapy, let's take that. A proven, peer-reviewed study and treatment to treat PTSD and depression. Other nations across the globe not only study it, but successfully use it. And Canada continues to bury it in red tape. I know this because I am the only person in Canadian history to legally receive medical psilocybin outside of a clinical trial. Before I was approved, Health Canada offered me electroshock therapy, and I am so sorry they offered that to you, don't you dare. There are other solutions, people. So think about that. This government would rather electrocute somebody who has a traumatic brain injury's brain into absolutely nothing instead of offering me a plant.
Sharon credits the treatment for saving her life after she struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder and treatment-resistant depression due to her service in Afghanistan. At the end of the hour, Sharon raised her voice as the committee was about to cut off her time to list a host of ways MPs could work to prevent more suicides among the CAF.
Emerging treatments for veterans and first responders 2 years ago. You said you were going to give us funding for psychedelic-assisted research. You said that we had the proof. You said we had the evidence. Give us that.
True North was provided a Abacus data poll which found that 51% of Canadians support allowing the use of natural psilocybin medicines or, quote, magic mushrooms under medical supervision for therapeutic purposes to veterans, first responders, and others to treat depression, addiction, PTSD, and end-of-life anxiety. Geoff, this is definitely a huge and often overlooked issue, how we treat our veterans after they've served so bravely for this country. And a lot of them are just left out in the cold, particularly when it comes to mental health. And we've all seen those stories of veterans being told to access MAID instead of being given options for treatment. So what are some of the other things that Sharon asked for during this committee that might help veterans who are struggling with this sort of thing?
Yeah, Cosmin. During her testimony at the Committee on Veteran Suicide Prevention, Kelsey Sharon laid out a whole bunch of specific asks beyond just psychedelic access. She pushed hard for the government to start properly tracking suicide numbers among CAF members and veterans, which is something she said they've completely failed at so far, leaving everyone in the dark on the real scale of the crisis. She also demanded an immediate halt to offering medical assistance in dying as an option for veterans dealing with PTSD or treatment-resistant depression, calling it out as straight up harmful and sharing proof of cases where Veterans Affairs staff pushed it on struggling vets. On the funding side, she called for the full delivery of promised money for psychedelic research trials and to tear down all the bureaucratic barriers blocking vets from therapies like psilocybin-assisted treatment. As her time was winding down, she rattled off more urgent steps, like expanding peer support programs run by vets themselves, overhauling the disability claims process to make it faster and less traumatic, and investing in community-based mental health hubs tailored to military trauma. She didn't hold back on how the Liberals' inaction is costing lives. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he has a, quote, different recollection of conversations with Prime Minister Mark Carney prior to releasing an anti-tariff Reagan ad, despite Carney's claim that he advised Ford to pull the campaign. During a media scrum at Queen's Park in Toronto on Monday, Ford told reporters he would, quote, never apologize to Donald Trump after Carney did.
You don't want to correct the public record here? The Prime Minister says he had to apologize, and he said that he asked you specifically not to run the commercial.
Well, again, I'm not going to go back and forth. Had a different recollection of our conversation, but that's, people don't need that. They want to move forward, to get a deal, to protect jobs and protect the economy of Ontario and of Canada.
So you don't remember him saying no?
You don't remember him saying
no? Again, I'm not going down that avenue. I know I've talked to him this morning through text message. We have a great relationship. We're focused on the same areas, and that's protecting Canadian jobs, Ontario jobs, the steel sector, the auto sector, life sciences, and manufacturing.
Ford said, quote, I've never apologized to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's trying to destroy our province, destroy our country, steal manufacturing jobs and auto objective jobs, steel jobs, aluminum jobs, the list keeps going on. I'll never apologize to President Trump, and I'm going to continue fighting for the people of Ontario and the people of Canada. Ford noted he rejected multiple requests from the Prime Minister to take the ad down following U.S. backlash. He also said he understands Carney wants a deal with the U.S., but claimed the president would give Canada a bad deal anyway.
What was the Prime Minister's tone when he asked you a couple of times to pull the ad? Was he personally angry with your actions?
No, he wasn't angry at all. I fully understand the position he's in. He's trying to talk to the president, but the president was going to give us a terrible deal, like they gave UK a terrible deal, gave Japan even a worse deal, in my opinion, and we weren't going to go down that rabbit hole of getting a terrible deal. I always say no deal is better than a bad deal. And that's what President Trump wants. He wants a terrible deal for Canadians. I take a different approach. I want the AMCAN fortress, American-Canadian fortress, that we can grow the pie, create more jobs, just like Ronald Reagan did.
On Saturday, Carney told reporters in Malaysia that he apologized to Trump over the ad and that airing it was, quote, not something he would have done. Ford said Monday he doesn't recall Carney telling him not to run the ad before it aired. So, Cosmin, what did Carney say on Saturday? Is Carney lying about disapproving the ad before it aired, as the reporter suggested? And what was the most recent U.S. response to all of this?
So, yeah, Geoff, this has been quite a back and forth, not only from the U.S. side to the Canadian side, but between Carney and Doug Ford. But the most recent happening, I just saw in the news earlier that David Eby, the Premier of Alberta, essentially backed out of a similar ad campaign. Now, I'm not sure if he was going to use Ronald Reagan quotes in his ad, but the BC government was set to do an ad blitz in the United States, and they just backed out of that after speaking to the federal government. And this comes after the weekend where Mark Carney was in Malaysia, and he told reporters that airing the Ontario ad was, quote, not something he would have done, and confirmed he had himself apologized to U.S. President Donald Trump. So the question is whether he's lying about disapproving of the ad beforehand, or whether he looked on approvingly as Doug Ford has indicated, or rather that was his interpretation that he put out there. It's difficult to say because Carney's saying he warned Ford about this ad and now has taken some responsibility through that apology to Donald Trump. But it does show a major rift between Ottawa and Ontario. over handling the U.S. trade relationship, a rift that I don't think was really there before, or at least it wasn't there and apparent in the public eye, because Doug Ford and Mark Carney have presented this amicable relationship between each other, and it's a carry-on from the relationship that Ford has tried to project with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as well. But the ad itself has quite a convoluted history, and it's only a few weeks, well, maybe like a week or week and a half max. But back in mid-October, Ontario launched this $75 million campaign using these clips of Ronald Reagan. And between October 21st and the 23rd, Trump gets word of it. Either he sees it himself, or more than likely he was told by his own aides and own officials about this happening, and he publicly denounces it. But by October 23rd, he cancels trade talks with Canada, specifically blaming this ad. Now, Ford agreed to pause the ads a day after the cancellation of trade talks, but airs them one last time during the World Series, which prompts Trump to retaliate shortly thereafter with a 10% tariff on Canadian goods, which is an immediate economic cost that Canadians will have to suffer when those go into effect. Now, Ford is still calling it the most successful ad in North American history. He has his own ministers and officials praising the success, or so-called success, of this ad. But if we're measuring success by attention, sure, that might be true. It's obviously a global story. But the results can't be called successful under any measure. We've seen an escalation of the trade war. Canadians are going to suffer because of this. So it is really a matter of both Ford and Carney kind of projecting diametrically opposed visions and trying to pose themselves as the leaders in this trade war. Now, we have to remember that Ontario is a huge trading partner and a huge part of Canada's trade relationship with the United States. So they are sort of butting heads and stepping into each other's territory when it comes to trade relations with the United States. And Doug Ford here is staking his own territory and making quite a significant move, albeit a negative one, for Canadians at large when it comes to the overall dialogue between Canada and the United States. Because right now we only have Doug Ford to blame for trade talks falling through. Now, that wasn't Ottawa who did that. It wasn't Ottawa's trade negotiators. It was the Premier of Ontario. Liberal Industry Minister Melanie Joly dodged tough questions from Conservative MPs about missing job guarantees in the government's multi-billion-dollar deal with Stellantis. The exchange came as Joly confirmed Ottawa has begun a formal dispute resolution process against the automaker after it relocated Jeep Compass production from Brampton, Ontario, to Illinois, resulting in the loss of approximately 3,000 Canadian jobs. Joly said, quote, "The government will take the next step under the contracts to recover Canadian taxpayers' money. This means that we'll start the 30-day period of the formal dispute resolution process in order to bring back production at the Stellantis Brampton facility." Joly told MPs the government's move was in response to what it considers a violation of, quote, legally binding commitments made by Stellantis in exchange for up to $15 billion in federal and provincial subsidies. Joly said, quote, "These actions are not symbolic. They are the direct consequence of the violation of clear commitments," she said in French. When a commitment toward the Canadian government is not respected on behalf of Canadian workers, there are consequences. Conservative MP Raquel Dancho pressed Joly repeatedly to identify where in the Stellantis agreements there was a job guarantee for Brampton workers.
You should be able to tell us if there is a jobs guarantee for the 3,000 jobs in Brampton.
I think you're falling into the trap of trying to find a problem where there's none.
Well, the problem is that 3,000 people were laid off.
The government
and
was
your
trying
government committed
to do
thousands, millions and billions, in fact, of dollars.
Well, MP Dancho, I don't know whether you want this to be a monologue or you want me to appear. Because
the question
if you
I'm
want
asking
this
you
to
is
be a
very
monologue,
clear.
I don't need to be here.
Geoff, what was the minister's response to Conservative MP Raquel Dancho's questions about there being no job guarantees in this contract?
Well, Cosmin, Joly basically sidestepped Dancho's grilling by insisting the job guarantees were baked into the 3 linked contracts, but she wouldn't cough up specifics like numbers or exact locations, blaming commercial sensitivity. When Dancho pointed to a public contract that only mentioned guarantees for the Nexstar plant and not Brampton, Joly shot back, saying, quote, "I must dispute what you just said. This is not a fact," and doubled down. There's always job numbers, guarantees. That's exactly why the government of Canada and also the government of Ontario have decided to support the company. Later, when Conservative MP Michael Guglielmin asked why the agreements detailed DEI quotas, like 50% women non-binary on boards, but skimped on Brampton jobs, she pivoted with, "Are you against women being on boards?" Overall, she kept circling back to the dispute process, kicking off to claw back funds and force production back, but never nailed down those elusive guarantees, leaving the Conservatives fuming about transparency.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.